Now let us look at Winston's heritage as the elder son of the third son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. The first Duke, nemesis of Louis XIV of France, and winner of the battles of Blenheim, spelt B-L-E-N-H-E-I-M, but pronounced B-L-E-N-N-I-M-M, or Blenheim, Ramillies and Oudenarde and Malplaquet, was John Churchill, shown here with his family. Plain Winston Churchill was thus born into one of the most aristocratic families in the country, but was nevertheless a minor member thereof. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, that third son of the 7th Duke, had married Jenny Jerome primarily because she was an heiress, rather than on account of her being American. So Winston was the child of both high social status and born into the world of late Victorian wealth, although he himself did not inherit an enormous fortune. He was, nevertheless, actually born at Blenheim Palace, named for the first Duke's first great victory and the most grandiose noble pile in the country, albeit in a bedroom temporarily functioning as a coat room, where his mother unexpectedly gave birth when attending a Blenheim country house party. This photograph of his cousin, the 9th Duke, in 1970, presumably says it all, summing up in the blink of a shutter what it meant to be born into the aristocracy. The grey silk top hat, the wing collar, the exquisite bow tie, the perfectly cut coat, the strap of the binocular case strung so carelessly over the shoulder, the longish but not too long hair curling over the ear, and yes, the confident, secure, cheerful expression on the cleanly shaven face. Plus, it is hard not to notice an incomplete set of scraggly teeth. So, we get to Chartwell. The future Prime Minister had a long and distinguished, but essentially conventional career as a soldier, as a journalist here on a speaking tour of the United States, an author of a book in this instance called The River War, and politician. He had also married a suitable society bride, Clementine, and by the early 1920s yearned in typical English fashion for, quote, a house in the country, unquote. He found one in Kent, Chartwell, to Clementine's considerable displeasure. But Winston had set his mind on it. The Weald of Kent, which meant so much to him and to Vita Sackville West, is for the English aristocracy what Sherwood Forest is to the rest of us. The forest primeval, idealized. Weald is a form of the German Wald, which means forest. The primeval forest supposedly surviving into the present day, which of course it does not. There is virtually no ancient forest at all in Britain today. Yet the fact that the mystique of the Weald is based on myth is what, of course, gives it its potency. And moreover, the reality has its own power and vitality, which I think this picture demonstrates perfectly. What is known as the Weald is in reality the kind of rolling English countryside of trees, fields, hedgerows, farms, cattle, horses, church towers and steeples, ponds and pubs, country houses and country cottages, so beloved by the painters of those pictures, wreathed in sentimentality a la Thomas Kincaid. You all know Thomas Kincaid is good. Such things found in souvenir shops all over the British Isles, on calendars and candy boxes and cookie tin lids. Chartwell's view over that real world was what captivated him. And in characteristic aristocratic fashion, he had to have it. And so they bought it in 1922. From then on until his death in 1965, his home there was indeed to be, in the words of the 17th century Lord Chancellor Cook, recently cited in the ultimate upper-class country magazine, Country Life, his castle, which essentially meant his compensation for not having inherited one palace, Blenheim, just as Sissinghurst is Vita Sackville West, sticking her finger in the eye of the great world for having been deprived of yet another one, Knowle, which she felt should have been hers. At the time, Chartwell itself, whether considered merely as a house or certainly as a manor, and it has been called both in its time, did not have much to recommend it except for that view, since it was clearly going to take a large investment of money, which they did not have, to turn it into the kind of setting that people of their class felt they had to live in, which is why Clementine was so adamantly opposed to the acquisition. And indeed, she was right. It was a money pit, until a group of wealthy admirers bought it in 1947 and gave it to the National Trust so that the Churchills could live there indefinitely without money worries. The name of the property, whether house or manor, as in to the manor born, which both Churchills most definitely were, derived from two circumstances. The 7 springs that flowed first into the Chartwell, and then into the stream that overflowed from the well, down the slope at the top of which a house seems to have sat since the 18th century, and to the original appearance of the land itself. The Old English word chart meant, quote, rough ground overgrown with gorse, broom, and bracken, of the type still found scattered all over Britain. Broom, in the middle, is only a seasonal bloomer, and gorse, top left, is supposed to be the opposite. There is, in fact, an old country saying that, quote, love is not in season when the gorse is not in bloom, unquote. But it is not often found in such masses as are seen here. And the look of the land the name probably indicates is what is known in the south of England as heath, and in the north and west as moor. Neither is particularly brightly colorful most of the year, and most of the time usually appearing as the prototype of the hues usually thought of as earth tones. The house, which the Churchills acquired in 1922, has been much altered in the 19th century, presumably not to its betterment, since it was dark and gloomy inside, and, as photographs from about 1870 make clear, smothered in fashionable ivy and overshadowed by the kind of doom-suggesting trees that pervade the romantic Gothic mysteries of the highly popular Victorian writer Wilkie Collins. Winston Churchill's still young children loved it as it was, for what it was: mysterious, haunting, and overgrown. The elder Churchills nevertheless set out to change all that. The first thing they did was to hire an architect, one Philip Tilden, fully worthy of consideration in his own right, who, suffice it to say here, was highly instrumental in working with them to transform Chartwell into the lovely, light, airy, elegant, dare I say it, Noel Coward-esque, enchanted interior space it is today. It was Tilden who gave the front of the house a new look, as you've presumably already noticed. And he also added a not-so-noticeable wing. He deserves much more credit than he is usually given. The picture conveys the entirely correct impression that he was someone both Oscar Wilde and Noel Coward would have been entirely comfortable with. And I think both would have been entirely comfortable with the ambience that he and the Churchills created. We will look at the high points of that airy interior after touring the garden. Here is the layout. Churchill's precious view of the Weald looks out from the house itself and the terrace below the house across a landscape he created, which surely, whether he had it in mind consciously or not, was inspired by that of Blenheim. There, the lake and the bridge the palace overlooks constitute the central features of what is probably the most famous landscape of the most famous English landscape designer, Lancelot Brown. He came to be known as Capability Brown because when he was hired to reconfigure great estates in the faux natural style fashionable in the 18th century, he gave his employers an assessment of their properties' capabilities. Let us begin our virtual tour at those springs in the stream which flows down through the view for which Winston bought the property in the first place. The stream has been dammed to form ponds, a swimming pool, and two lakes, the upper, the smaller, and the lower, the larger of the two. Here, Churchill was most typically himself. The carp pool was a favorite place to sit, which he is famous for having done a lot of, sitting and thinking. That's his chair, still there. But he was also extraordinarily active physically. He didn't exactly do the necessary jobs himself in creating the upper and lower lakes, for example. No one person could have, but he was down in the mud and dirt and involved well above his elbows. He was also never above calling in any mechanical help that could be dredged up, in this case an appropriate metaphor, and himself designed a railway system to haul away the muck involved in turning what had been little more than a swamp into the lower lake. The serenity of the results, which you can see here, belie the hard work that went into them. If you look carefully at this view, you can see Winnie and Clemmy still sitting there, looking out over the tranquil water. John Bull, recognizable instantly even from behind.